We're far enough into the NBA season where some teams have settled in. They're confident with their team, while others, they're in full panic mode. And we're going to identify which teams those are on today's episode. As always, if you have any thoughts, drop those down in the comment section below. But it's the NBA Panic Meter. Welcome. Let's get into it. Now this one is obvious, but the LA Clippers should be in full panic mode because they're 6-20 on the season, they're the 14th seed in the West, and they're 1-9 in their last 10 games. But that is not the fault of James Harden. Despite being up in age, he's still averaging 26 points and 8 assists a night, shooting okay from the field, while his counterpart is simply not there. Now, again, tell me if you've heard this before, but Kawhi Leonard is not healthy, especially in the biggest moments or when his team needs him the most. Kawhi Leonard, though, with that being said, when he's played this season, is still averaging a very efficient 26 points a night, 2 steals a night, and 49% from the floor. However, he's not there for his team. He's only played a handful of games, and that's why they were struggling. They're 4-12 with Kawhi Leonard this season. Hey, on one hand, 4 of your 6 wins have come with Kawhi Leonard, but 12 losses have also come with Kawhi Leonard on the court and playing. They're 2-8 without him this season, which, again, a player of Kawhi's caliber, that is expected. But the problem with this Clippers team is, 1, their age, 2, the star players not being there in the Kawhi Leonard era and healthy when they need it the most. But also, it's just the effort on a nightly basis. You know, Kawhi Leonard, when I go back to his stats here, you're saying, Owen, 26, 2, 50% from the floor is great numbers. But when you watch the Clippers on a nightly basis, you can tell right away why this team is 6-20. Because Kawhi Leonard is not the same defensive player that he once was. And rightfully so. He's getting older. However, this team as a whole, effort-wise, is putrid. It's terrible. You can see why they have one of the worst defenses in the NBA. And on offense, when you have one of the slowest pace teams, it doesn't really fix any flaws on the other side of the court. Now, like I mentioned, the age is a concern. When you look at their current payroll, you have Kawhi Leonard 34, James Harden 36, Zubac is 28. You just extended him, and he's taken a step back from his career season last year. You brought in John Collins, who is on a 1-year deal, has a player option, most likely will come back, but for the hefty price tag of $26 million. You also have some veterans like Bogdan Bogdanovic, Brook Lopez, Nick Batum, all on 1+1s, but you can't really trade any of them this season to give this roster an extra punch because they're getting so much money and their production is not really there. So those guys will all be gone next year, but for this year, you got to ride with them, right? But when you look at a guy like Kawhi Leonard, he's owed $100 million over the next 2 seasons. James Harden has a $36 million player option that he's going to accept going into next year, whether if he's on this team or not. When you look at this payroll, you don't have a lot of youth. You don't have any assets to flip to get youthful players to be excited for the future. So you're kind of just stagnant. And you would say, oh, and well, at least we have our lottery pick, right? No, you don't. The LA Clippers don't even have their first round pick this year or the betterment of their pick next year. As Oklahoma City, the 24-2 team, the team that looks like they can break records, they own the Clippers pick, which is scary for the future of the NBA. So the Clippers don't have their first round pick this year, as I've mentioned, but they also are going to be taking the worst of the first round picks between them and the Thunder next year, which means they're probably going to have a pick from the 28 to 30 range, given the Thunder should be one of the contending teams yet again next year. But there's also some things that we have to take into account with this team and their future and how players in free agency might view this organization. Because the first thing, before the season, we have an ongoing investigation between Kawhi Leonard, Steve Ballmer, and how they handled his contract many years ago. That is under investigation, and that might affect the Clippers down the line and into the future if Kawhi is on this roster or not. So Kawhi could be gone for nothing, and then you got to deal with the consequences of how they handled his contract, which again, is not really Kawhi Leonard's fault. But also, remember how they brought in Chris Paul to be on this farewell tour of his career. He made it known that this was the last year of his career. And simply because he tried to push his coaches, push his teammates to be better, and show more effort, they decided to let him go and send him home in his last season. Not the way you treat a legend. So the way that this Clippers organization has handled contracts, the way that they've handled this roster, the effort that's shown on a nightly basis, there's no doubt in my mind. At 6-20 without your first round pick, you should be in full panic mode if you are the Clippers organization. Now let's go to the Eastern Conference with my favorite team in the NBA, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And boy, I'll tell you, it's been an interesting season because coming into the year, we saw no Tyrese Halliburton. We saw no Jason Tatum, no Jrue Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis in the East. We said this is finally the year that we can put it together and at the bare minimum compete with the Knicks in the Eastern Conference and go to the NBA Finals. However, at 15-12, we're the 7th seed in the conference. Sure, we have a pretty good offense, but we're 4-6 in the last 10, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. When you talk about the shortcomings in the Donovan Mitchell era, we have to go back to the first year. We were 48-34, which is a pretty good year without a LeBron James in Cleveland. We went to the first round of the playoffs. I was at one of those games, electric atmosphere. We beat the Orlando Magic. Then we go on to take the eventual champions on in the second round, the Boston Celtics. Granted, that Boston Celtics team was one of the best teams we've seen in the last decade, and we lost to them. Whatever, right? Wipe the slate clean. It's the first year with a big star in Cleveland. Now, let's put it all together, and let's go win in 2024. And it looked like we were going to do that. We started off like 20-0. We finished the season 64-18, the number one seed in the NBA, period. Then we go into the first round, beat the Miami Heat. We look good, right? And then we get ahead of ourselves. That has been the MO in this core four of Cleveland with Jarrett Allen, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, and Evan Mobley. We get ahead of ourselves. We don't show up for the big moments. And we lost in the second round to the Indiana Pacers. As a Cavs fan, I look at these two losses in the playoffs, these two shortcomings, and I say, the positive thing is that we've lost to the Eastern Conference champion back-to-back years in the second round of the playoffs. But I also look at the bigger picture and say, we had a better roster than the Pacers. We should have beat them. And we should have put up a better fight against the Celtics in 2023. So when I look at this roster, I'm looking for some things that we can change. And one thing is the health of Darius Garland. He needs to be healthy. And if he's not going to be healthy for the majority of seasons, we need to part ways. He's a younger piece. And if Donovan Mitchell plans on staying here long term, Darius needs to be moved for a guy that is on the court all the time and can contribute on a nightly basis. The other problem we have, outside of Jarrett Allen, is the consistency and the lack of improvement of Evan Mobley. In 2023 and 2024, again, the first year of Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley was averaging 16 points, 9.5 rebounds, and shooting 58% from the floor, while also being one of the league's best defenders. I think he was second in Defensive Player of the Year that season. So you're saying, great, that's a great third option on this roster. But then, the more we get into his career, we're expecting Evan Mobley to be the top 3 pick that we drafted him to be. A guy that can rival Donovan Mitchell to be the best player on this roster any given night. We just haven't seen that because we've seen a dip in his production last season, though he did win Defensive Player of the Year. And then this season, his agent and Evan Mobley, they were crying all off season. They were moaning, hey, give me the ball more. We know Darius Garland and Max Strus are going to miss the first part of the season, so let me handle the offense. Let me have the ball in my hands more and give this offense a different dynamic. And we said, okay. Kenny Atkinson said, okay, go to work. Show us what you can do, Evan Mobley. And you haven't done anything. You've shot a career worst, at least in the last couple of years, as far as efficiency from the field. You're still averaging in the ballpark of 19 and 9 a game. You're not really improving. And the defense, I would say, has taken a step back this season. So for Evan Mobley to not take have any progression in his game, it's concerning, especially when you want this dude to be the future of the franchise. So Evan Mobley, along with Jarrett Allen and his inconsistencies in the playoffs, being constantly outstrengthed and outplayed by bigs that I think generally we would say are worse than Jarrett Allen in the postseason. That's concerning. Darius Garland's health and Donovan Mitchell. You know, I had more concerns with him early on in his Cleveland tenure, but recently I'm starting to really feel bad for him. But given the fact that we've had the talented rosters, we've had the injuries across the league in the Eastern Conference, and we still cannot put it together, we cannot develop some of these younger stars and stay healthy, I'm on my last straw with this Cleveland Cavaliers roster. If Donovan Mitchell plans to stick around for the long haul, we need to see something out of Evan Mobley and this core four around Donovan Mitchell in this second half of the season and postseason run. If not, I want us to make at least one, if not two changes to this roster going forward. So I would say we're not in full panic mode, but we're right there. Now, a longtime rival of the Cleveland Cavaliers has been the Golden State Warriors. They're 13-14. They're the 8th seed in the Western Conference, and they are 4-6 in their last 10. But hey, you do have a top 6 defense. That's something, right? For Steph Curry, when he's on the court, you are competitive. Go figure, right? When he's not, you struggle. You're 9-9 with Curry this season in the lineup, and a lot of those come with big-time, high-scoring 30, 40-point performances, even some 50-point games in there. Sorry, Spurs fans. But without him, you're 4-5, and you have one of the worst offenses in the NBA today. Steph Curry on the season, despite being, 36, 37 years old, is still averaging 29 points a game and shooting basically 50, 40, 90 from the field. That was like unprecedented 10 years ago to shoot 50, 40, 90 and score that many points in a single season. Steph Curry continues to amaze us as NBA fans, but his Robin, Jimmy Butler, a guy that they brought in to give Steph Curry some easier nights, he's having a very good season, and I do think that that is going under the radar as far as NBA media, because Jimmy Butler, 19-6 tonight, almost 50, 40, 90, as well as Stephen Curry, 44% from three is incredibly impressive for Jimmy Butler, but also he's giving you that defensive impact. But when you look at this Warriors roster, it's Steve Kerr saying, Steph Curry, we're trying to get you to help, but we don't have any assets to get you help. Now, I do want to say that Jonathan Kuminga, look, you try to play him a little bit more this season. You try to give him a little bit more of an impact and a role in this offense, but he's simply just not a fit for this Warriors system. And I think that's clear. Though Warriors fans might want him around for the long term, when you have a player like Steph Curry and you have veterans like Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green that you can't really move for other pieces, the only real piece you have in a trade right now is Buddy Hield and Jonathan Kuminga. Maybe Pat Spencer, maybe Quentin Post, but you get the picture. You need to trade Jonathan Kuminga if you want Steph Curry to have a slim chance of competing for a title in a loaded Western Conference this season. Because we saw last year and in years prior, when Steph Curry's healthy, especially in the playoff time, he's the most difficult player to guard outside of Nikola Jokic, and they can compete with many teams in the West like the Timberwolves of last year. For the Warriors, the reason I'm worried about your team, now I'm not really in a panic mode yet, is because you still have time to make a big-time trade, but you need to do it sooner rather than later, especially in the Western Conference, where every single game matters. Now, the Warriors could be in the mix for a Giannis Antetokounmpo, and let's talk about those Milwaukee Bucks, because right now they are 11-16. They're the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. They have a bottom 10 offense, and they're 3-7 in their last 10 games. As we know, about a week or so ago, Giannis went to the front office, and apparently he had a conversation about his future. Coincidentally, the next night, he went down with a non-contact injury. I don't want to say it's fake. Giannis doesn't seem like that kind of player, but it is definitely coincidental. Giannis might be forcing his way out of Milwaukee. But let's take a trip down memory lane, because this team won their first title in franchise history with Giannis back in the 2020-2021 season. If you remember, that was the first season that we had fans back in the stands. But since then, there's been a lot of up and downs, and really a lot of downs, right? In 2021, you lost in the Eastern Conference semifinals. 2022, you lost in the first round as the number 1 seed, if I remember correctly, to the Miami Heat. And then you fired Coach Budenholzer, right? Then going into 2023, you brought in Adrian Griffin as your head coach. I think you were 30-13, but for some rhyme or reason, you decided, maybe it was Giannis's decision, to move on, to get a different voice of reason as the head coach. You would go on to lose in the first round of the playoffs that season anyway. Now, this past season, or in 2024 rather, last year, you hired Doc Rivers, then you would go on and lose in the first round yet again. So ever since their title victory in 2020, there's been a lot of downs and a lot of shortcomings in the postseason. Granted, there's been some injuries along the way. Giannis has missed some time. Chris Middleton missed some time. But still, you're not going as far as you're hoping to when you have a top 2 player in the world on your roster. Giannis is still averaging 29 and 10 this season, shooting an incredible 64% from the floor, which again is incredible given the fact that he is the number one option on a nightly basis and shooting almost 20 to 30 attempts a night. But for Giannis and this team, I will say this. You should be in full panic mode if you plan to keep Giannis on the roster going forward because you don't have salary cap room, you don't really have a lot of young pieces, and you don't really have a lot of veteran pieces that you can move in order to get other pieces in a different dynamic on this roster around Giannis. But if you plan to move Giannis in the future, I think trading him, getting multiple first-round picks, some young assets along the way, that can jumpstart this rebuild. So for Milwaukee fans, on one end, you're trading the best player in your franchise's history, but on the other, you're sending him to a great spot where he can compete, and you're getting a boatload of assets in return to jumpstart a rebuild that won't take as long as you may think, right? I know it's scary to imagine a team and a world in Milwaukee without Giannis Antetokounmpo, and I'm sure he doesn't even want to leave town, but it may be the best for both parties. So for that reason, that you could trade Giannis in the coming weeks or maybe at the end of the season, the panic button, I will say it is not full panic, but it is right there like the Cleveland Cavaliers because you can trade them and you can jumpstart a whole new era of Milwaukee Bucks basketball. And finally, the Atlanta Hawks. And this is in question because Trae Young is returning to the lineup in about a week from today's video. I had a request for this team, so let's dive into it. They're 15 and 12. They're the 10th seed in the East, and they're 5 and 5 in their last 10. So definitely not the worst numbers given their situation. Because in the first 5 games of the season, Trae Young was in the lineup. He was their leader, their facilitator, their closer, but they were 2 and 3 in that stretch. And without him, well, they've had a much better defense. When Trae Young was in the lineup, they were the worst defense in the NBA. Now they've climbed their way back up into the top 20. They're 13 and 9 without Trae Young, being in the mix of the Eastern Conference playoffs, even being as high as 3 at one point this season. But in those first 5 games, we not only got a bad version of Trae Young, we maybe had the worst version of Trae Young because he was averaging 18 and 8. Sure, good numbers, but shooting 37% from the floor, shooting 19% from 3, that is absolutely insane, especially we all know the player that Trae Young is on the defensive end. He's a black hole. So if Trae Young's not shooting efficiently offensively, he's ending a lot of possessions early. He's not getting the best shot. He's not getting his teammates involved. So he's just shot chucking, but also not defending a dang thing on the other side of the court. So that is definitely a thing to be concerned about. When you look at how fun and how young this Atlanta Hawks rotation is, and again, how well that Jalen Johnson has been playing, the extra role that he's taken on in the absence of Trae Young, you don't want someone to come back into the rotation and mess up what they have. Now, I do want to say on one end, I don't expect Trae Young to play this bad when he returns, right? I do want to say Trae Young is a top 10 point guard, but there's definitely things to be concerned about because if Trae Young comes back into the lineup, he's not shooting great. He needs a while to get back to being his great offensive self, but also the defense is still as bad as it always has been. There's going to be definitely some questions about the future of Trae Young in Atlanta, but for that Atlanta Hawks fan that reached out to me, I wouldn't be too worried, right? When Trae Young returns, let's give it a month. Let's give it 10 to 15 games where he can settle in. He can find, the best way that he can operate this offense there, as I say that in not the best words or manner. But let's just give him time to come back because he is one of the best players in the NBA. I do understand the defensive concerns, and I do think that their defense may take a hit, but offensively, you're going to be that much more dangerous, and hopefully Trae Young helps this offense and doesn't hurt it. So as far as being a panic meter, I'm only a little bit concerned about the addition of Trae Young in about a week. But that's it, man. NBA panic meters as far as the rest of this season and even going into the future. How worried should those teams be? As always, I want your thoughts in the comments section below. We could have went through every team here in today's episode, like the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets. Those are teams that have very little things to panic about because, well, they're set up for the now and partially for the future as well. Teams like the Knicks, teams like the Pacers even, not too much worried about some teams like those and organizations. So that's why I just picked out a handful of teams that you guys sent to me here off of last week's episode. But that's going to do it, man. If you enjoyed, of course, drop a like and subscribe to the channel. But as I've said, drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll get back to every single comment.